In this movie, we'll take a closer look at content-aware cloning, and we'll see how it's variously employed by content-aware fill as well as by the spot healing brush. So the first thing I'm going to do is click on this content-aware layer and turn it on as well. Notice that it does not feature the Z's. So we just have this gradient oblong sphere set against this gridded background. Now I'll go up to the rectangular marquee tool, click and hold on it, and select the elliptical marquee. And I'll select around this big oblong sphere, just inside of it, however. So notice it has this blurry edge, and I'm selecting just inside the shape. And now I'll go up to the Edit menu and choose the Fill command, which is how you get to Content-Aware Fill inside Photoshop. And now notice that I have content set to Content-Aware, which is very important, of course. And my blending options are set to their defaults, so the mode is normal, the opacity value is 100%, preserve transparency is turned off. I also want to turn off color adaptations so we can compare its behavior. So we'll start with it off, and now I'll click OK in order to accept that change. And notice that Photoshop is drawing its source information from outside the selection. So it's sourcing stuff outside the selection and cloning it inside the selection. And it's figuring out how to do so based on the information directly outside the selection outline. And as a result, we get some fairly square grid action going as opposed to what we had before, which is this sort of perspective spherical grid. I'll go ahead and press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac to redo this operation. Notice also that we have some pretty abrupt color transitions. And so while Photoshop is trying to smooth things out, it's not necessarily doing so with a radical degree of success. Let's compare that to turning the color adaptation checkbox on. So I'll go ahead and turn on the color adapt layer, and I'll click on it as well to make it active. And then I'll return to the Edit menu, once again choose the Fill command, which has a keyboard shortcut of Shift Backspace here on the PC or Shift Delete on the Mac. And I'll leave everything the way it was before except for this one option. I'll turn on color adaptation, and then I'll click OK. And again, Photoshop is cloning the stuff outside the selection outline to the area inside the selection. And as a result, we lose our spherical perspective, and we get this sort of hodgepodge tile pattern going. But we also have better smoothing between the colors. So notice if I go ahead and zoom in right about here, I'll turn off this layer so we can see what Photoshop did before. Notice that we have this area of purple that's abutting this area of green right here. If I turn the layer back on, now we're seeing what happens when you turn on the color adaptation checkbox. We still have this area of purple that's adjacent to this area of yellow-green. However, we also have a little bit of blending here. So we've got this dim purple and this dim green that are meeting with each other. So just slightly improved color and luminance interaction thanks to that checkbox being on. Now let's see what the spot healing brush does. I'll go ahead and turn on the spot healing layer and click on it to make it active as well. And now I'm going to go ahead and select the spot healing brush tool. And I'll make it just really super big so that I can paint inside this selection. And that's one of the great things about Photoshop is you can paint inside selections with any of the painting tools, including the spot healing brush. And then as soon as I release, notice that we get an even better color interaction. So once again, we're sourcing outside the selection, which is containing the brushstroke, incidentally. And so we're getting this irregular tile pattern, but we're also getting a little bit of the original colors from the shape. So if I were to turn spot healing off so that we can see the color adapt layer, notice that we have not only the patterns outside the selection, but we also have the colors outside the selection, these yellows and these greens and these purples, as opposed to the original colors, which we can see down here in the overlapping Z's layer, which were yellow, red, and blue. But if I were to turn the spot healing layer on, you can see that we do have, in addition to the purple, and we have a little red interacting with the green, and we have a little bit of yellow interacting with the green and the orange outside the selection. All right, now I'll press Control-D or Command-D on the Mac to deselect the image. And let's see what happens if I just paint around the outline of this shape. Photoshop is now going to reevaluate this painted area using the information outside the brushstroke. And as a result, notice that it's making the shape a little bit smaller, and it's doing a fairly good job of blending the colors as well. All right, I'm going to revert the image by going up to the File menu and choosing the Revert command, and that will bring back this image complete with the Z's. I'm going to click on a spot healing layer up here at the top and turn it on once again. And this time I'll reduce the size of my brush a little bit by pressing the left bracket key, and I'll paint around the shape. And I want you to see that this time Photoshop goes ahead and brings in some of those distorted grid lines. That is the ones that have a little bit of spherical distortion associated with them. And that's because this area was outside the brushstroke, the area that I'm gesturing to here in the center of the shape. And because it's outside of my brushstroke, it is a candidate for duplication subject to the rules of content-aware cloning. But I could also get rid of that entire shape if I like, just by painting over the entire thing. So I would have to make sure my brushstroke covers all of that shape and then release, at which point Photoshop is going to do its best to duplicate everything outside of the brushstroke. And what's amazing about this, I'm going to do it again, because this is fairly spectacular. So I'll just go ahead and press Control-Z or Command-Z on the Mac and paint over this area. Notice that by the time I get done, there's not much to draw from. So always bear in mind that when you're content-aware cloning, you're cloning from outside the brushstroke or outside of a selection. And so when I'm painting nearly the entire image like this, Photoshop does not have much source information, and yet it does a pretty brilliant job of covering up that shape. And then if I don't like some portion of it, like this area right here, I could just paint over it once again and let Photoshop reevaluate that area. And now, if you just imagine how adept this technology is at covering up blemishes inside of an image, then you have a sense for what we're going to be doing in the very next movie.